But at this point, though, I think gold's going a lot higher than 5,000, and that's because uh, between then and now, the problems that led me to believe that we'd have $5,000 gold are much bigger. We were able to kick the can down the road for over a decade, but in doing that, all of the problems got much worse. So unfortunately, now I think it's going to be a much bigger economic crisis. I think we're going to have a dollar and a sovereign debt crisis, and I think gold is pretty much a warning that that's what's going to happen. Back in 2007, when the subprime market blew up, that was something that I had been forecasting would happen for years, and I knew that was going to be part of a broader financial crisis. And so when that happened, I became more convinced that the financial crisis was going to happen soon, and I was warning about it. But most people just believed that what happened with subprime was an isolated event, that it was contained to subprime, and I knew that wasn't the case. And I think what we're seeing now in the gold market is a similar warning. And I think it's also going unheeded, but I think that the crisis that's coming now will be a lot worse than what we had back then. It's not just a mortgage crisis. This is sovereign debt we're talking about. This is, the United States government treasuries that are falling into question, and the value of our currency.
Yeah, well, back in 2008, I think the debt was 9 or 10 trillion. Now it's 38 and a half. So a lot of the situation, much of the situation is worse, but people tended to flock to US bond. But what do you see happening now with the bond market and the US dollar? You think it's going to be less of a safety net as opposed to what it was back in 2008?
Yeah, I mean, I think the world is trying to move away from the US dollar. That's pretty clear, with foreign central banks being major buyers of US dollars. And I think that, the United States has alienated a lot of countries and, created a situation where they have an added incentive to move away from the US dollar as the reserve currency. And so I think they're accelerating that move. And I think that gold is going to be the primary reserve asset to replace the US dollar and US treasuries in reserve for foreign central banks. And I think that, the world is going to move away from the US, and this is going to be a big problem because now the US rather depends on the world. The world supplies us with the goods that we don't produce, and they loan us the money that we don't save. And without, the world doing that, the US economy does not function. It's not viable unless we have the world propping it up.
I spoke recently to Jim Rogers, and he's very reluctant to give any prediction in terms of timing. But he says what he knows will come, but and he's not sure when it's going to happen. But nonetheless, how can we expect to, well, I guess, experience this financial crisis coming our way? Is 2008 still a good model to follow in terms of how it might unravel?
No, I think it's going to be very different than 2008 because, again, 2008 was about private credit. It was about mortgage credit. And the U.S. government was able to bail everybody out by substituting its own credit. But this is very different. This is where the U.S. government is really going to be the epicenter of the crisis. It's the fact that there's been a loss of confidence in the United States' ability to honestly repay its debt and, to get control of the deficits and inflation. And so it's very different. There's no way for the U.S. government to bail itself out. And, during the financial crisis, the dollar strengthened. When we entered the financial crisis, the dollar was at a multi-year low, and it actually got stronger during the crisis, which actually helped mitigate the harm. But this time, I think the dollar is going to be at the epicenter of the crisis. The dollar is going to be tanking, and that's going to add to the problems, because it's going to fuel higher interest rates and higher consumer prices. So we're going to have a protracted economic downturn but with high inflation and higher interest rates. And it could be very high interest rates.
But if people are fleeing the dollar, where will they go? Is it just the metals or crypto, or again?
Well, I don't think much of it will go into crypto. I think a lot of it is just going back into their local currencies or stronger currencies, and then gold. I think central banks will, be more likely to hold gold as a reserve. But I think it's just going to be on balance, not wanting to hold U.S. dollars. It's not like you have to get into anything. You just don't hold dollars. Well, I mean, nothing lasts forever. We have a tremendous amount of debt in the United States, and a crisis was pretty much inevitable. You hear this. Powell said at his most recent press conference again that our debt is on an unsustainable trajectory, but that the level of debt is not unsustainable. And I think he's wrong. I think the level is unsustainable, and we're gonna find that out, because the reason that they have to keep interest rates so low is because if interest rates normalize, we couldn't afford to service the debt, let alone repay the debt. But whether we end up having hyperinflation in Weimar Republic style, I don't know if it's going to get that bad. It could, but I think there's going to be a considerable devaluation of the dollar, and that means prices in the United States will rise substantially. I mean, a lot more than what we've seen in recent years. I could see the general price level in the United States doubling or tripling. And that, that would result in a very substantial decline in the standard of living of Americans. But it would also result in an increase in the standard of living of non-Americans. Because as everything got more expensive here, it would get cheaper every place else. So, the world has a lot to gain from this. Yeah, I think all of this is adding to the problem. I mean, certainly the threats of invading Greenland, I think, were a real wake-up call as to the real risks to the world of continuing to finance U.S. military buildup. I mean, without the world loaning us money, we could not afford the military that we have. And the fact that we then threatened to invade a peaceful country simply because we wanted its territory, because we thought it was somehow strategic to the United States, I think was a huge mistake on the part of Trump, as are the tariffs, because Donald Trump is vilifying the entire world, claiming that the world is ripping off America, taking advantage of America, when it's actually the reverse that's true. And the tariffs that he's imposing are, of course, on Americans, but it is disruptive to global trade. It's disruptive to companies operating in other countries because it makes their goods, less affordable to Americans by raising prices. And so, it shows that the United States is an unreliable trading partner, and the United States should not have the reserve currency. Because the reason we have these huge trade deficits is because we have the reserve currency. I mean, that's kind of like the deal. Because the only way that you can earn dollars is to have a surplus with the United States. But that benefits the United States because we don't have to produce all this stuff. We get to consume it, but without having to do the hard work of making it. Also, we get to borrow a lot of money without having to save it. So, we've got the better half of the bargain. And I think we're about to lose that privilege. I think the world recognizes finally that this relationship is not advantageous to the rest of the world, and they need to move on.